Greetings, I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. For all the returning listeners and subscribers, thank you so much for coming back. To those new to the channel, thank you for taking a moment to check us out. If you dig what we're doing, please hit like and, of course, subscribe. It goes a long way in promoting the channel. A quick reminder that we will be continuing Star Wars Month here on TIR. Today, after this show, we'll be watching Return of the Jedi. That's right. And there's only a couple ways you can watch it. You can be a paid YouTube subscriber, so you can just click the join link and you should get a message or one of our posts to see the link to join us for the watch party, or become a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can access champagne rooms past and present, go back and see past movie night watch party replays, and you get the satisfaction of knowing that your contribution makes sure TIR can stay on the air. And if it sounds good and you're like, I don't know, well, you can test drive, if you will, a patron membership for 7 whole days. That's right. Try out Patreon, see for yourself. Join us for one of these movie night watch parties. If you like it, great. If not, no pasa nada. No big deal. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about what you guys came here for. Andor and Revolutionary Suicide. Andor, the Disney Plus prequel to Rogue One, is one of the most politically serious entries in the Star Wars franchise, precisely because it trades in human struggle over mythic heroism. In contrast to laser-wielding messiahs or cosmic prophecies, Andor centers the quiet, deliberate, and dangerous work of organizing resistance. It's a narrative grounded in the mundane and often brutal material conditions that push ordinary people toward revolutionary action. Revolutions, the series reminds us, aren't singular, explosive moments. They're long, agonizing processes, full of contradiction, loss, and sacrifice. And unlike our own increasingly commodified political moment, where slogans, symbols, and even dissent are quickly absorbed into market logic, Andor offers a rare cultural vision of revolution that feels real, necessary, costly. In this episode, we explore how the show dramatizes what Huey P. Newton famously called revolutionary suicide. Not a nihilistic death wish, but the recognition that resisting an unjust order may come at the cost of one's life and yet is still worth it. In his recent essay for Everyday Analysis, our guest, Borna Radnik, argues that the show offers a dialectic between hope and reality, one that mirrors Newton's framework, whether it's the prison floor shift manager Kino Loy, who chooses uprising over survival, or Luthen Rael, the spy master who sacrifices his own soul to keep the rebellion alive. Andor shows us that revolutionary struggle begins when comfort is no longer an option. Today we ask, what does it mean to die for a cause in an age where dissent is a brand and revolution is algorithmically discouraged? How do we find meaning in struggle when there's no guarantee of victory? And what lessons can Andor teach us about our own time when collapse feels more like content than crisis? To have this discussion with me, I have the man who would know more about Andor than anyone else. You know, he's coming live from his den in the Death Star. Please welcome Deep State Cuba.
Hello, everyone. I skipped an ISB all hands meeting for this.
Are you ready for this one, Cuba?
I feel like I understand the assignment, or maybe the way to put it is I've done the reading. Let's see if I understand the assignment.
Ooh, okay. And coming all the way live from a secret bunker somewhere in the Dagobah system, Please welcome Borna Radnik.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to talk about Andor and revolutionary suicide.
Which I was kind of shocked. I saw Alfie. I think we have a mutual friend in Alfie who posted your piece. You write that revolutionary suicide is premised on the idea that hope itself is dangerous. How does Andor portray hope as both a motivating force and a dangerous liability?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's right there throughout the entire show, right? So I don't know if your viewers have seen Andor seasons 1 and 2, but even if you've just seen the first season, the series starts off. It's 5 years before the Death Star blows up, right before A New Hope and Rogue One. We see Cassian Andor, who's the main character. He's just living for himself. He's a small-time thief.
Yeah.
He is struggling to make ends meet. And basically what happens throughout the first season is he is forced by his circumstances to become politically conscious, right? He is forced to become politically active. He realizes that he can't just basically go away somewhere and live his life quietly and ignore the Empire. The Empire won't leave him alone. And at a certain point, in the first season, he basically fights back in his own way, in different ways. And there's a very moving monologue given by his mother at her own funeral. It was kind of pre-recorded. It's the last episode of the first season, where Marva Andor, Cassian's mother, sort of talks about, the importance of fighting back. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of the monologue, but that monologue specifically from the first season, one thing she sort of says is, it might be too late to fight. I'm dead, so it's easy for me to say this. Maybe it's too late, or maybe it's not too late. And she sort of says, if I could do it all over again, I would wake up sooner and I would fight these bastards. And so right then and there we have just a quick snapshot of the fact that even if the circumstances feel dire, right, in order to fight for freedom and in order to fight against oppression and exploitation and against authoritarianism, there has to be some sort of hope. Nothing's guaranteed, of course, right? But if you're already resigned to the fact that there's no point in fighting, why bother? Well, then you're not going to get anywhere. So hope is, to kind of answer your question, it's both essential for revolutionary activity and revolution, but it's also quite nebulous and ambiguous and fickle, right? Because nothing guarantees that what you're going to do is going to amount to anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that space that Huey Newton, of course, talks about in his opening preface to his autobiography, right? That nothing's guaranteed, but we have to kind of fight anyway. We have to be resigned to this fact, and it takes courage.
Kuba, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that there's an interplay between the hope of some kind of victory, the hope that your struggle will be meaningful in one way or another, that this effort, this suffering, this work will not be wasted. And the other motivator, which is the reality of how bad it is, the fact that this isn't just normal enshittification, but there has been a shift to a new form of repression, a new system of authority, which doesn't lend itself to anything but that kind of high risk, high danger, revolutionary resistance. There's no voting away Emperor Palpatine. There's no talking to the manager of the Empire.
No, there is not. I wanted to ask you guys both this question. Is there a parallel in our current moment where hope feels more like a commodity than a catalyst?
Well, I think that one of the insights in Andor is that it, in some forms of the oppression that we see in the galaxy that are experienced, especially by Cassian Andor as a child, and when Space Peru gets hit by space miners that genocide the space indigenous in order to get at the presumably space gold, space oil.
Mhm.
That that particular atrocity occurs when it's still the Republic,
Yes.
and that there are continuities in the extractive, bureaucratic, authoritarian overall system of galactic administration that were creating repression and human suffering from the very beginning. Even you didn't even need the Sith to destroy that particular planet. But this is still when it presumably you could vote for Mon Mothma. You could still get a different set of people in the Senate. Maybe try to AOC it back to a regular, tolerable level of extractive repression. However, as you see in Ferrix, right, the first setting in Andor, there is this escalation of repression and control. And at a certain point, you can't pretend anymore. The reality is that while hope gets brought up as a motivator, it's the hope that comes with having no option but to hope, because the reality of the repression and the gathering power of the forces of repression, their organization, their motivation, their capability, means that it's now or never.
Borna?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, you asked about whether or not hope in kind of our world or our reality has been commodified, and it has been to a certain extent. You know, I mean, it everything from Obama's campaign to Yes We Can, right, to the enthusiasm around Bernie Sanders and AOC and Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. All of those campaigns utilized, or at least drew upon, the kind of aspirations and the hopes of everyday working class people, which is in some sense to be expected, right? Because people are suffering. People have been suffering for years and years and years under neoliberalism. And so any kind of glimmer of possible shifts that would alleviate some of these pains that people are enduring and are still enduring, maybe worse now, means that hope is utilized to get people elected. And well, in case of Bernie Sanders, you know, it was kind of quelled and then kind of co-opted by the Democratic Party. At least they tried to.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, I think it is still an essential prerequisite, like I was saying earlier, you know, and to Kuba's point, right? It's the conditions that kind of leave you with no other choice but to hope, and then that hope leads to action. And we see this in the Andor TV series really clearly, right? I mean, the Tony Gilroy has called the first season of Andor. He's the creator of the show. He's called it the education of Cassian Andor, right? So season 1 is the education of Cassian. It's his political awakening. We follow him from a, you know, essentially like a non-political person in the first few episodes. He's kind of just in it for his own skin, so to speak. And by the end of the last episode of the first season, he wants to join the rebellion. He wants to join Luthien Rail and the kind of resistance. So it becomes politicized, and this is partly because he has no other choice, right? the material forces and the conditions that he finds himself in leave him with no other option, essentially. And so I would say, even though hope has been commodified in our current culture to some extent, social change is impossible without any kind of hope. So it still has a significant role to play, I think.
So what say you guys? Because I agree with everything both of you have said. What do you feel that there, though, in our left world, sometimes there can be a very thick cloud of pessimism that almost feels like its main purpose is to extinguish hope, kind of with the goal of maybe sounding intelligent? How does that work against everything we're talking about? Like, a show like this is, to me, a great show. The little bit I've seen, I haven't seen all of season 1. I'm almost done. But from the first episode, I'm in. I'm loving it. I love the part where he's first leaving his planet, and he's like, "Oh, I know the Empire. I spit in their food." He's like, "Well, that's not really doing anything. It's not going to change anything. You want to go change something, be a part of this movement." And he, like you said, he's kind of forced into leaving, but it has been interesting to see that journey. It almost feels like today, the way we watch so many of these shows, it almost feels like the bigger shows want to extinguish hope with, well, this is what's wrong with everything.
Well, I think that there are a couple of challenges to generating the kind of hope that mobilizes people into a collective movement that does more than spit in the Empire's food.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, until we have Nemec's manifesto, we don't have a vision or a template or a narrative that explains to people that haven't been initiated, that haven't gone through the first person education of Cassian Andor, that might still have some very comfortable options like Mon Mothma. It's when we get that manifesto that we sort of hear what the inspiration towards hope might be, what direction is beckoning for a better future. And it's a little vague and nebulous in terms of what it's promising, which actually makes it a very useful proxy for Marxism, because no one knows what the communist utopia is actually supposed to look at. It's just over the hill. But there's a need for that kind of rallying cry, that vision for the next stage, which it's probably not a coincidence that it is vague, just like Obama was excellent at presenting a inviting canvas for people to project their particular hopes for the future onto him without foreclosing any interpretation that might be useful. You need to bring in a big tent. You have Mon Mothma style, bourgeois reformists. You have Saw Gerrera and his ultra Bolshevik, Che Guevara style ultras.
Yeah,
exactly. And you have all of these other factions, the Gorman League, which is an upper middle class, right? It's basically craft producers, people, an entire planet that's very well situated in supply chains, right? It's the kind of comfortable European social democracy that a lot of the online left loves to shit all over. But you need everybody. Some as martyrs, some as victims, some as fundraisers, some as contributors, some as operatives, working together if you're going to get anywhere. And one problem that movements of opposition have right now is that none of the visions for a possible future are at all inspiring or plausible. So you either have to come up with a complete fairy tale in order to have something that people might prefer over getting by and surviving under the conditions that we have. Or if you're being honest, then you can't really blame people for being like, oh, I understand the suicide part of revolutionary suicide now very well. Thank you very much. But maybe that sounds like a great job for somebody else.
Borna?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because I'm just thinking about the French Revolution. There's this line from Saint Just. He compares the revolution to, he says it's like a metaphor. It's like as if you're on a ship at sea, charting uncharted waters, and you don't have a map, right? And his point is basically, we don't really know where we're going, right? We just don't want absolute monarchy in France. We don't want this. So in that sense, it's a negation of the status quo, the current status quo, right? It's a rejection. It's a whole society saying no to the status quo. And what comes next? Well, at least for the French revolutionaries, they didn't have a manifesto or a program in place. They were kind of, hotly debating it in real time as they were, cutting off heads, so to speak. And I point that out to not to say that, that's all well and good, but that this has, of course, been a huge issue for revolutions ever since the French Revolution, right? Even the Russian Revolution. But I think that, Marx once said, he said, look, we're not in the business of being cookbooks for the future, right? And I think he's right about that. His point was, look, I'm not going to write, I'm not going to socially engineer for you an entire society that is based on a different mode of production than capitalism. That's not what I'm doing. I'm critiquing capitalism, right? And I want something like socialism, scientific socialism, or full communism, but I'm not going to write a book or outline a kind of solid blueprint. And of course, that makes a lot of people pessimistic, especially now, because of course we had 20th century communism and it didn't really work out for various reasons, right? Various contradictions. And at the moment, even pushing for welfare state capitalism, like Corbyn did with the Labour Party in the UK, or Bernie Sanders was doing, when he ran for president in 2016 and in 2020. Even that reformist model is no longer acceptable to the status quo. They were completely shut down, right? Both Corbyn and Sanders weren't allowed to attain any kind of political power, which is depressing. But of course, what this means is that the conditions now, we have Trump in the US and we have the Reform Party in the UK, who is now more popular than the Tories and the Labour Party combined, which is terrifying. Reform is the far-right party in the UK. The far-right political parties and movements are gaining traction. And so it's almost as if, those of us on the left, we're getting to a point where our pessimism isn't going to help, right? We need to set aside the pessimism and inject some hope into ourselves, because we really don't have any other choice, right? Things are becoming much, much worse. Never mind the climate crisis that is looming in the background, right? So even though basically, I'll just summarize or conclude with this. Even though I understand the pessimism because of the history of the left and the history of the revolutions of the 20th century, I still think that at the moment we should reorient ourselves a little bit. And again, Andor, the TV series, does just this. Cassian Andor doesn't have a blueprint in mind. He presumably reads Nemec's manifesto and he gets inspired by it, but he's not really thinking about a kind of utopian society. He just wants to do what he can to bring down the empire, right? So what happens next is sort of not really up to him as an individual, and it's not up to Luthen Rael, and to some extent it is up to Mon Mothma, because we know that she kind of goes on and she sort of survives. But in terms of being a revolutionary, like Sanju said, we're like a ship without a map, right? And that might not be satisfying to some people. But in terms of actually changing things, it might be the best that we can hope for, no pun intended, for now.
Well, let me just suggest that. So I was talking about positive hope, that you have a certain vision or program which is optimistic enough so that people want to build that. And while it's true that there wasn't something, an Elizabeth Warren, we've got a plan for everything package around the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, there were some beliefs and some concepts and some faith that you could use reason and you could use scientific insights to make a better society. Once you had unshackled the reactionary burdens of the past, you could build something build a better future with the insights that were available through the Enlightenment, through the scientific revolution, through the breakthroughs of the 19th century. Now, that optimism in the future, right, together with some nice distilled punchy slogans. For instance, Lenin was all about, we end World War I, we redistribute the land to the people, and we get rid of the Tsar, right? Simple, demonstrable lies, but useful ones. The lies were the freedom for the nationalities, because immediately the Bolsheviks rush through, try to Zerg rush Ukraine and Poland. But putting that aside, there's also a certain optimism that comes from being able to strike at the system of oppression, the empire, or you pick whichever right-wing administration you find most odious at the moment, being able to actually damage them. And that's why the Aldani raid, which is the initial caper in the first season, is such a big deal, because it demonstrates that the struggle against the empire is not hopeless. And I feel that in a certain way, what we've got with the Epstein situation right now, this is the first moment since Trump's inauguration, since the start of the second term, where he's really back-footed, has no plan, and nothing seems to be working for him. So that may be a point where some people have some hope that resistance is not futile. Maybe that can be built on. Maybe it will lead to a Gorman-style counter-reaction that's even harsher, that forces more people into a more radical type of resistance. But that remains to be seen. I think that the vulnerability of the system is another point that people can mobilize around. And we haven't seen that vulnerability very often in neoliberal, late capitalist, Western malaise that we're in. Everything is getting worse, but the structures of power appear to be dispiritingly stable.
Oh, they're really entrenched at this point. Huey Newton distinguished between revolutionary suicide and reactionary suicide. How does Andor dramatize this distinction through characters like Kino Loy or Luthen Rael?
Yeah, I mean that was the main kind of argument of my piece was
Mhm.
that I could, because the show doesn't shy away from this at all. So if you've seen all of season one, those two characters, Kino Loy, played by Andy Serkis, and Luthen Rail, played by Stellan Skarsgård, they both kind of embody Newton's concept of revolutionary suicide. Um, and very quickly, right, revolutionary suicide is the idea that someone is willing to even sacrifice their life for a greater cause, that they've kind of done the calculus for themselves and they're ready to do what it takes to kind of change the existing conditions. Um, and so in season one of Andor, we see this, the Kino Loy's character, he's a prisoner. Through some events, Cassian ends up in prison for something he didn't do, and he meets this character Kino. Essentially, they all learn that none of them are getting out. Basically, these prisoners are supposed to be serving limited terms, then they get released with good behavior and that kind of thing. Kino is one of them who's a few months away from being released, and they all learn that this is a big lie, that basically these prisoners are being worked to death. No one is leaving. And at a certain point, there's a shift that happens in Kino because he's resistant to this idea of fighting back. He wants to just, have his head down, do the work, and get released. Cassian sort of tries to persuade him. He's like, "Hey, listen, we have to fight, right?" There's a line where Cassian says, "Look, um, something like, I would rather die fighting them than die giving them what they want." And this basically leads to a prison riot. And so Kino Loy is radicalized, and he basically decides to take that message on. He doesn't know if he's going to make it. He doesn't know if he's going to survive. But he realizes, well, the current situation he's in prison. He can't get out, right? He was told that he would be released. That's not happening. So what does he have left? And that is to fight. So in that sense, he embodies this logic of revolutionary suicide. And very quickly, Luthen Rail, it's even more clear if you've seen the first season. There's a beautiful, epic, dramatic speech that Luthen Rail gives near the end of the first season, where he's asked, what is he sacrificed? So Luthen Rail, for those of you who don't know, he is sort of the spy master character. He's part of the rebellion. He's part of the resistance. He basically builds networks, collects people, sends people on missions. He's very secretive. He lives a double life. He's a art curator and a gallery owner with a flamboyant wig, and he plays a persona to the public. But in real life, he's like this revolutionary, ruthless, brutal human being. And so in that speech, he gives a speech where he's asked, what have you sacrificed? And he says, well, I've sacrificed everything. I've sacrificed my kindness, my calm, my sense of decency. He says things like, I'm forced to use my enemy's weapons against them in order to defeat them. He says, I know that I'm fighting for a sunrise that I'll never see, right?
Mhm.
So he's telling the audience that he knows that he might not live to see the fall of the empire, but he's fighting anyway. And he sacrificed everything, his mental health, his emotional health. He has no friends, he has no sense of love or kindness. And he's just resigned to this fact. He says, I woke up one day 15 years ago and realized that I had to basically devote myself to this cause. And he says, what have I sacrificed? Everything. And he literally means everything. He's essentially sacrificed his humanity, because he realized that as a human being with no force powers, he's not a Jedi, right? What it takes is that he has to just give the ultimate sacrifice. And remember, he doesn't know that there's no guarantee that what he's doing will actually work. There's no guarantee that his sacrifice will actually lead to anything, to lead to any kind of change, right? but this is something Huey Newton points out, right? He says, well, revolutionaries, we don't know, but that shouldn't deter us. We should have the courage to sacrifice in this way and be ready to sacrifice even our lives if it comes to that. And so both of these characters, at least in the first season, embody the revolutionary suicide. So does Cassian Andor, but not until the second season and Rogue One.
Is there a danger of misreading their sacrifices as merely tragic rather than politically necessary?
I mean, maybe. I think it's both. In the sense that the both in the sense that the two things are related. So the tragedy of their sacrifices is only tragic because of their political circumstances, right? Luthen Rael could have lived a happy life, had he not been basically born into and fought in some wars, and basically had he not found himself in the circumstances that he does find himself, which is under the thumb of the Empire, right? He's being squeezed, he's being squished, and he doesn't like it, and he hates it, and he wants to do something about it. So the tragedy element is tied to the political necessity of it, right? Same with Cassian, right? Cassian, I mean, if you've seen Rogue One, you know what happens to Cassian Andor, right?
Yeah.
He could have very well just lived his life on Ferrix with his girlfriend and lived a simple life, but that was kind of, in a sense, taken from him, right? In a sense that he was forced by his conditions to do something and to fight back. And the show does show both. I'll just mention this very quickly, which is that in both seasons we see what happens to people who don't fight back, who just try to play it cool, or who try to appease the Empire. They ultimately end up getting harassed or killed or manipulated or used anyway. I'm thinking particularly of the character of Cyril, who is the kind of goody two shoes, police wannabe from season 1, who basically tries to find Cassian Andor. He's the kind of security guard of that planet, and then he ends up kind of working for the Empire, right? He's a tragic character too. He's not a bad human being necessarily. He's just kind of misguided and kind of ideologically indoctrinated. But I would say the two things are connected in that these revolutionary suicides or sacrifices of these characters, and it happens in real life too, right? That activists or people who fight against oppression and who lose their lives doing it, often there's an element of tragedy to it, but it's politically in some sense necessary or unavoidable at least.
Kuba?
I'm glad that you brought up Cyril, because we've been talking about Cassian and we've been talking about Luthen, but I think it's time to bring in the real heroes of the series, the brave men and women of the Imperial Security Bureau. The Leo Partagaz, Deidre Miro, the Supervisor Hirt, and of course Lonnie Young, right? All of them dedicated, capable, intelligent, committed, very highly professional.
Yes.
And I think that one reason why you have such a build-up before even Ferrix, which starts out as space, Manchester, right? It very gritty, not much to appreciate about their imperial administration. But it takes them a while to mobilize and to fight back. And I think you have this vast bureaucracy, this power structure, which really does try to uptake the best and the brightest. It matters to the Empire that there are competent and motivated people who have the right resources doing things like internal security or Death Star development. And so much talent and energy and dedication and collective social resources are sucked up into the administration and the exercise of power, that many regimes, as long as they dedicate 10%, 15% of that capacity to delivering some kind of collective goods as part of some kind of stingy, perhaps, social contract, you can have stability, right? If as long as the Imperials are coming in and saying, these are the rules, you play by the rules, we leave you alone, we don't take anything more from you, then people will accept that. It's when they see that the Empire is not being honest, when they fry 100 men inside that prison in order to keep the secret that no one was getting out alive. It's only when they lie about their motivations and actions on Gorman that you have more of a revolutionary sentiment expanding throughout the galaxy and feeding into the rebellion that ultimately overthrows the Empire. And to bring it back, I think that for some of the people in the MAGA movement who have been very supportive of Donald Trump, their implicit social contract with him as their leader included going after the Clinton pedos attached to Jeffrey Epstein. They expected the Epstein files. They were promised the Epstein files. That's what they signed on for.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a problem for the Trump administration at this point, because it is too overtly a betrayal of the commitments they made to their very followers. You don't need universal support in order to maintain power. You don't even need majority support, but you do need some core base of support for the stormtroopers, for the ISB recruits, for the engineers that are going to build your system of repression, for the Ewok wranglers, right? You don't need the Ewoks, but you need the Ewok wranglers. And if you are, if it becomes too obvious, the mendacity and the deceptiveness and the self-servingness of the system, then you might lose even someone like Cyril, which is kind of, he's very tragic because he gets to that realization just a little too late.
That seems to be kind of a theme of a lot of the prequel shows, even the cartoons, that there has to be someone inside that defects because they start to understand kind of the hideous nature of the system. Taking it to the moment we have now and the Epstein files, I think it's interesting you bring that up. Is there a kind of Palpatine-esque hubris that this administration has where, Palpatine gets to a certain point? We watched Revenge of the Sith last night, and there's a scene where Palpatine is fighting Yoda, and he's shooting his dark Jedi Force stream at Yoda, and he's just yelling unlimited power because he's got the unlimited power now in the Senate. When I watched that 20 years ago, even as an adult,
No filibuster.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about overriding congressional oversight. I was thinking he's got the unlimited power of the dark side. Is that kind of how this administration is treating this thing right now that you're talking about, where, look, I don't care anymore about votes because we have unlimited power and we will crush if we have to. Look at us round up all these brown people. We will round up Americans. We'll round up anyone that disagrees. Unlimited power.
I think that we're going to see how unlimited that power really is. Because, like I said, you don't need everybody. You do need the Ewok wranglers. And the real world equivalent is people like Mike Johnson or other congressional Republican apparatchiks, organization men that keep the MAGA movement together, that maintain direction towards what are now called the president's priorities, right? And I think that there are these loyalists that got to their position through Trump, need Trump, and are nothing without Trump. People like Kash Patel, people like Pam Bondi. Mike Johnson is an interesting creature because he's not a Trumpist. That's not his particular brand of Republican lizard person. And as the Republican leader on the congressional side, he's not exactly best served by giving unlimited power to the executive branch and surrendering division of powers for the sake of a MAGA consolidated executive.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more useful to him personally if his congressional role remains relevant. He can extract concessions, maybe even get Trump to kiss his ass. And I think that that's what he's doing right now. He is simultaneously supporting Donald Trump and being a good, loyal soldier by recessing the Congress early to avoid an embarrassing vote on the Epstein files. But he's also playing up the relevance of those files and the existence. He refuses to go along with the whole Epstein hoax narrative that Trump has been trying to spin with little success so far. And just like in Andor, you not only have Leo Partagas, but you also have director Krennic. You've
Mm-hmm.
got other competing factions within the imperial structure.
Mm-hmm.
The Navy, the Corpo Rent-A-Cops from the beginning at Ferrix. The interplay between those forces is all very relevant to political outcomes. And you might end up with shifts inside the system that have downstream consequences, but are not triggered by revolt or revolution.
Borna, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Kuba was sort of saying there. It's interesting because as I was listening to him kind of talk about Trump and the Epstein files and everything, I got reminded of two things. One is although I haven't seen it, the South Park episode that came out last night, which Trump hated because they satirized and made fun of Trump and so on, which is funny. And also the what Nemec says in his manifesto in Andor, which is that authoritarianism is brittle, or oppression is brittle, right? It cracks. It's and so here we have a president who is acting like a king, right? He's flat out ignoring the kind of division of powers in the U.S. He's ignoring the courts. He's ignoring Congress, and he's kind of wielding the executive branch as if it were a monarch's mallet or something like this. You know what I mean? However, at the same time, though, I do, I want to maybe question or pose the question: do we really think Trump's administration and its power is unlimited, right? Because here he is he can't shake this Epstein thing, obviously, and we'll see how it kind of plays out over the course of the next few weeks or even the next month or so. But he's canceling the Colbert Report. He's going after comedians. He's trying to, and he has to some extent silenced some opposition in the media, or perceived opposition, because certain media groups have capitulated, right? Same as certain universities and law firms. And so if you see all of this stuff from a distance, you think, well, oh yeah, shit, Trump is really, what can we do? He's wielding so much power. There's really nothing we can do, right? Um, but that perception is part of the ideology of any authoritarian ruler, right? The myth around being this absolute force and this absolute power, the show of strength, is necessary to uphold its kind of status quo position, right? So even in Star Wars, even Emperor Palpatine, even the Empire needs to continuously show its force to anyone and everyone, right? And any kind of crack in the system, like you mentioned the Aldani heist, and you're right, this is why the Aldani heist was so significant, because it showed everyone the Empire is not that strong anyway, right? We can get at the Empire. We can steal from the Empire from right under their noses, right? And there's a line that Cassian says in the first, I think it's the second or third episode, to Luthen, right? Luthen asks him, "How did you steal the little thing that he steals, right? That Luthen is after initially?" Um, and Cassian says something like, "I just walked right in. They don't notice me. They're so fat and full of themselves. They don't even really care, right?" And so it's that contradiction between, because absolute power goes to your head, right? Trump thinking that he has unlimited power, even though he really doesn't. But the fact that he thinks he has unlimited power means he has to continuously lash out in any and all, real or perceived threat that might undermine him. Everyone from Stephen Colbert to South Park, right? But every time he does this, he's just demonstrating to everyone how weak he is as a human being. So I'm just pointing this out, that at the level of ideology and at the level of perception, and how the general public perceives the authoritarian figure, or the tyrant, as it were, is crucial to upholding that power, right? And I'm just wondering if what you both think. Do you think that Trump, you mentioned the Epstein case, he can't shake it. So I'm wondering what you think. Do you think that this is sort of showing cracks in Trump's edifice here? That he doesn't really have this unlimited power that he thinks he does.
Well, I think that Trump, having worked inside the figurative Death Star, which is the military-industrial complex in Washington, these are human beings. They show up to work, and if you want to keep output smooth at the repression factory, your repression gnomes need to be relatively motivated and satisfied, and not worrying about their jobs and not griping about whoever the king is at the moment. And during the Obama administration, when there was sufficient pressure against some of his policies which I actually supported, things like the Iran deal, normalization with Cuba, etc., those repression gnomes were able to push back and undermine his policy agenda. Trump has had much better advice this time around, and a much more radical program, and he's cleared out many of the people who were the foot draggers and the bureaucratic, desk warriors against the erosion of norms, against, both Obama being too soft and Trump being too crazy, right? The Goldilocks people. They're gone. And Trump has been very aggressively putting his own personnel, his own loyalists, into positions of authority in the branches of the government that matter. Now, he got 10,000 more ICE agents in the Big Beautiful Bill, which I think is very consequential, because this is his apparatus of repression: ICE, DHS, Customs and Border Patrol. These are his stormtroopers. I don't know if that process has matured enough for him to be able to weather something like the MAGA defection over Epstein through just hitting repress faster, right? Going down the hard power and authoritarianism route. I think that there probably isn't enough juice there yet. And he might need another year before he can really shut things down. But we've lost Colbert. And as the chat says, perhaps it's no great loss. But the fact that a president can, through pique and his personal authority, get a major franchise pulled off of TV just to reduce the level of criticism, just to increase his overall life comfort, that's a very disturbing sign. Similarly, all the capitulations of different institutions, universities, law firms, what I think is the criminally inadequate response to the nationalization of the California National Guard by Gavin Newsom. I think that these bode very ill for the ability of the system to push back. The question is, can something like this Epstein files moment shift that dynamic so that you have more offense being played and more people willing to push back and resist? Because it is kind of a spell, authoritarian power, right? There are all kinds of people that have been bought whose interests align with the authoritarian ruler. There are all kinds of people who are ideologically aligned with him and who want this project to succeed. But compliance is assured through the fear and calculation of the people who have too much to lose to do otherwise. But now maybe they're not so afraid anymore, and that changes the calculations of agents that have more authority and resources than anyone on this podcast.
Borna, do you want to respond to that, or?
I mean, I'll just say that. Well, I mean, I largely agree. So I'm not much of a
There's no decision.
no real disagreement. I mean, I'll just say that it's yeah. I'll just leave it there.
You nailed it, huh?
I was gonna say something, but nah.
Okay.
We can move on.
Okay, well, we've been talking for about an hour, so I want to thank you, Borna, for taking the time to talk to me today. Wherever you guys are watching or listening to this show, there is a link in the description to Borna's piece in Everyday Analysis. Kuba, also, always a pleasure.
The pleasure
to
is
see
mine.
you on my screen. In
Just
closing,
don't Lonnie Young me at the end of season 3.
I have only
Wait, when
seen-
you get to the end of Andor, you'll figure it out.
Okay, I'll know what it means. Okay, inside jokes. Okay. The commodification of rebellion is a real world concern in today's media and political landscape. In what ways does Andor resist this tendency? And can fiction like Andor actually cultivate political consciousness, or is it still susceptible to the same cultural absorption it critiques?
Why don't I give a quick take and then give it to Borna for the last word?
Okay.
I think that what Andor has done is taken a franchise that's very accessible and recognizable and well regarded by a lot of people, and injected a adult level of moral seriousness about the consequences of both obedience and rebellion. and illustrated it through fully formed characters that are often just trying to do their best in the circumstances that they're in, where they end up grasping towards hope in different ways that collectively then add up to political change. And other Disney franchises, other Star Wars content lacks the seriousness. It lacks the awareness of consequences. It lacks the tragic ethos. It lacks the awareness that suicide might be the choice that you're making, and yet you have no choice but to make it anyway. And I think that the eerie way that the second Trump administration is reflecting events that people recognize from Andor does help translate the lessons from inside the narrative into applications and analysis to real world events.
Borna?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that what Andor manages to do, which is what I find fascinating. I mean, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I grew up watching the films and everything. And of course, George Lucas has always maintained that even with the original trilogy, right, the Star Wars has always been kind of a political a franchise, even though it's kind of couched up in weird space opera mythos and space magic and all the rest of it. George Lucas himself has always said that his inspiration for the rebels fighting the Empire in A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and so on were the Viet Cong fighting the Americans, right? It was the Vietnam War. As well as the Nazis and the kind of Americans and the British and so on. But what Andor does is, yes, it is a more adult, kind of up-to-date, more realistic account of those same political themes that you have in the original trilogy. And it is more human, right? In the sense that, and this is a brilliant move on Tony Gilroy's part, we don't see any Jedi. There's no lightsabers in Andor. We don't see Darth Vader. We don't see Emperor Palpatine. We don't see Yoda. We don't see any of the major players. We don't see Obi-Wan and so on. We don't see any of the heroes, right? Who we do see are workers and farmers and bureaucrats and art gallery owners and revolutionaries like Saw Gerrera and his band who have to kind of steal rhino fuel essentially, right? And he ends up getting addicted to it. We see human beings just struggling day to day, right? And I want to end by pointing out that this is what makes it quite a distinctive and revolutionary TV series, and one of the most politically literate television series, because it shows you what it takes for normal people to organize, to become politically conscious and active, and the struggle that they have to go through in order to shake off the chains of oppression. And like Marva Andor, Cassian's mother, says in her funeral speech, right? She says of the Empire, she says, we ignored them, they would come and leave. Well, guess what? They're not visiting anymore, right? The Empire is a cancer at the heart of the galaxy, right? It's an open wound that won't close. And to close that wound, Andor demonstrates in a very realistic, emotional, morally grounded, and also morally ambiguous at times, because Luthen isn't a nice person. He's a brutal, ruthless revolutionary, right? But it demonstrates all the humanity and all the complexity of what it means to really be a revolutionary and what that does to you, right? If you've seen the second season of Andor, you know that Cassian is a knots, right? He's not a happy guy, right? He's carving pieces of himself off, metaphorically speaking, to fight against the Empire. and the show does this with patience, with respect. It doesn't condescend or patronize its audience, right? And how Disney greenlit such a show is still baffling to me. They will probably never do it again, but it is, I think, one of the most politically literate and significant shows of the 21st century.
Wow. Hell of a statement. From everything I've seen, I agree with you. I think you can say the same thing about Rogue One. I think to some degree you can say the same thing about Star Wars. Again, in rewatching these movies with everyone, and again, thank you for all the patrons and paid YouTube subscribers that have joined us for Star Wars month. It is an interesting look, especially by watching the prequels, because the prequels are being done around the time of the Gulf War, the Iraq War. So, questioning empire, fighting empire, what it looks like from the glorious end battle, blowing up the Death Star, into the kind of gritty, we just have to get the plans to our boys part of it, that some of us were teared up watching Rogue One. So props to you, Disney. I hate to say it.
Well, we can just say Tony Gilroy. Disney also gave us The Acolyte.
I haven't seen any of that stuff. I'm not going to shit on it.
You're not missing much, trust me.
All I can say is this. I think I'm older than both of you, and I loved my Star Wars action figures. And if there was a world where I can have more action figures, I'd have been all in. I watched the Droids cartoon from the 80s. I've seen the Battle of Endor. You can't tell me what bad television is. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Borna. You can't.
But have you seen the Christmas special?
I've seen the Christmas special, not when it happened. But have you seen the Droids cartoon?
I have not. No.
Exactly.
So you got me there.
That's my point. Until you've watched the Jedi-less trash that came out post that movie, you can't talk about anything. It can't be worse than the Battle of Endor. Kuba, you've seen the Battle of Endor. You were there.
Yeah, we don't talk about that, right? I have less to explain at the Hague if I wasn't. Space Hague.
Space Hague? Where does the Space Hague happen? Corsica?
It's got to be somewhere else, right? Like, honestly, Gorman would have been a good one, except now they destroyed it. So I'm just going to say Kushik 3.
I'm so mad you know all those planets. Well, look, again, wherever you guys are watching or listening to the show, there's a link in the description of Borna's article. Please read it. It is very, very good. And if you would like to join us post-show, we're going to watch Return of the Jedi. We can talk about rebellion, little people in furry costumes. What's a better duel? That was a conversation. What was a better duel? Obi-Wan, Anakin, Revenge of the Sith, Luke, Vader 2 in Jedi, or Obi-Wan, Vader 1 in Star Wars. That's the worst fight ever, but as a young person seeing it for the first time, that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. Alec Guinness having a laser sword fight with Darth Vader.
Before they added the digital effects, it kind of looked like he had the world's saddest pointing stick. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is not going to end well for Obi-Wan. Right? Like, that thing's made out of aluminum.
Or you know, it was a good one when Obi-Wan fights Vader in the Obi-Wan series. That was good. I don't know.
Yeah,
like that.
There've been some good ones. But I don't know if either of you have seen the. I think a fan remade it. It's on YouTube. It's a recreation of Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan fighting Vader on episode 1, episode 4. I mean, A New Hope. But it's done with like new fight, like new fight choreography. And I forget what it's called. A fan made, like it's a fan made, like, oh, this is how the fight should have looked like. And it's actually pretty badass, and it's pretty like well done. And you can find it on YouTube and watch it. And like they kind of modernized that fight between Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan, and Darth Vader in A New Hope. And it's like really good production for like a fan made thing. I'm not gonna lie.
Some of this fan made stuff is next level.
Although I do kind of like the idea that you've got like an old dude that's been living in a desert cave for a really long time, right? So let's be realistic about the athletic potential of Obi-Wan, together with burnt husk of half man flesh held together by an electronic suit. I kind of like the idea that they would actually both really, really suck at the athletic part of the sword fighting, and it would just be all force, right? That's the only thing they've got going. And Darth Vader is walking around, like skulking around the Empire, going like, "Holy shit! I hope they don't figure out like how you could just push me over, right?" I've got like 2% muscle mass remaining, right? The suit is doing everything. If this short circuits, I'm fucked, right? Don't tell anybody that, right?
Don't get Darth Vader wet.
Yeah, exactly.
That was never part of the plan. Like, just water. Well, look, we're gonna do movie night. If you want to join us, become a patron for as little as $3 a month, $30 for the year. You can join us for all these fun movie nights. We have even more things planned for next month. That being said, thank you guys for joining us. YouTube pulled this. I will say this at the end. YouTube apparently pulled the stream because we said the word suicide in the title.
Ah, right. Yeah, you
That
can't
is why
say that.
people say things like unalive. I don't want to sacrifice language for lack of context.
You should be speaking Chinese, my friend.
Context should always matter, and let's never forget that. Don't make unalive part of your personal lexicon. Say the word. Say the word. Context.
Double plus unalive.
We are out.